There's a strange kind of freedom in pretending. Not the kind of pretending that deceives or escapes reality, but the kind that Alan Watts spoke of, the kind that says, "What if I lived as though everything will always work out?" Not because I'm naive, not because life is easy, but because deep down, I suspect that the way I relate to life shapes how life relates to me. That if I walk through the chaos with trust instead of tension, something changes not outside but within. And when that shift happens, I stop being a victim of life's unpredictability, and I start becoming a partner in its unfolding. This isn't just a spiritual idea. It's a radical philosophical experiment. And the deeper we go, the more we realize it just might be the only way to live without losing our minds. Let's start with the obvious objection. That's ridiculous. Not everything works out. Bad things happen. People suffer. Life is unfair. And yes, you're absolutely right. But here's the twist: Alan Watts wasn't saying that everything always goes your way. He was saying that everything that happens is part of the total process of life, and that life itself is not a problem to be solved, but a dance to be danced. When you pretend everything will work out, you're not predicting the outcome. You're stepping into a mindset where you no longer resist the process. You stop clutching at control. You stop fighting the flow. And when that happens, you become present. You start seeing things not as threats, but as unfolding patterns. You stop needing guarantees and start trusting in participation.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Think about how much of our anxiety comes from this one idea. What if it doesn't work out? We run scenarios in our heads. We prepare for disaster. We hesitate to act because we don't want to fail. But here's the philosophical trap: by constantly preparing for the worst, we live as if the worst is already happening. We carry the weight of 10 futures that may never come, and in doing so, we rob ourselves of the only moment we ever really have, now. Watts would say that this obsession with outcome is the root of our suffering, because life is not a straight line. It's a wave. It rises and falls. It twists and turns. And in trying to flatten it into something predictable, we lose the joy of the ride. So what happens when you pretend everything will always work out? You stop being paralyzed by fear. You stop waiting for some perfect moment when you have all the answers. You start moving. You start creating. You start speaking your truth, not because it's safe, but because it's yours. And here's the paradox: when you act from that place of trust, things start to work out. Not perfectly, not always as expected, but in ways that deepen your experience, sharpen your awareness, and connect you to something larger than your ego's checklist of goals. Let me ask you something that might stop you in your tracks. What would you dare to do if you were certain it would all work out in the end? Not just in terms of success, but in terms of meaning, in terms of growth, in terms of becoming more you. That's the challenge Alan Watts offers us. Not to deny hardship, but to stop being afraid of it, to stop living defensively, to stop bracing for impact every time life shifts. Because when we live that way, we're not alive, we're just surviving. And surviving is not the same as living. But let's go deeper. Why does pretending work? Why does this strange mental trick seem to have real-world effects? The answer lies in how perception creates reality. Not in a magical law of attraction way, but in a deeply psychological and existential way. When you believe life is hostile, you tighten. You close off. You miss opportunities. You interpret neutral experiences as threats. But when you believe life is unfolding in your favor, even when it's hard, you soften. You stay open. You become more resilient, more creative, more loving. You start seeing patterns where before you saw randomness. You begin to dance with life instead of fighting it. Watts often compared life to music. He said the point of music isn't to get to the end of the song. If that were true, the best musicians would play the fastest. The point of music is the play, the movement, the experience of each note. And life is the same. But here's where most of us get trapped. We treat life like a race, a series of checkpoints, a linear path towards some final destination. And in doing that, we miss the music. We rush through the melody. We reduce our lives to tasks, achievements, and numbers. And then we wonder why we feel empty, even when we're winning. So what does it mean to live as if everything will always work out? It means you stop needing to arrive. You start paying attention to the moment you're in. You start asking better questions, not how can I avoid failure, but what is life asking of me right now? Not when will I feel safe, but what would it feel like to trust this moment? And in that shift, you become a different kind of person. Not someone who never suffers, but someone who suffers well, someone who suffers consciously, someone who lets life carve them into something deeper, instead of collapsing every time the script changes. Here's the philosophical bombshell. You're not in life. You are life. You're not some outsider navigating a hostile world. You are the universe, experiencing itself through a particular lens. And when you pretend everything will always work out, you're not faking optimism. You're aligning your mind with the deeper truth that you are part of the whole, that you are not separate, not isolated, not abandoned. And when you live in that truth, even for a moment you feel something that no external success can give you: peace. So let me ask you one final question before we move forward. What part of you still believes that peace comes from control? That part of you is tired. It's been working overtime. It's been trying to keep you safe in a world that was never meant to be controlled. And maybe it's time to let that part rest. Maybe it's time to stop gripping the wheel so hard. Maybe it's time to take a breath, look at the road ahead, and say, not with certainty, but with courage, I don't know where this goes. But I trust that I'm not alone. I trust that the dance is worth it. I trust that everything is unfolding as it should. Because sometimes pretending is not a lie. Sometimes it's the doorway to the deepest truth of all. The courage to trust, how surrender unlocks the real power you've been missing. We've been conditioned to believe that control equals power. That the more we plan, the more we predict, the more we prepare for every possible outcome, the safer and stronger we'll be. But Alan Watts flips that logic on its head. He tells us real power doesn't come from control. It comes from trust. And not just trust in a vague, feel-good sense, but trust as a deliberate, radical act of surrender to the flow of life itself. That's what makes it so powerful. Because surrender isn't passive. It's not giving up. It's giving in not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. It's the moment you stop trying to dominate life and start collaborating with it. And that moment changes everything. Let's be clear, the kind of surrender Watts speaks of is not about letting life walk all over you. It's not about ignoring pain, injustice, or responsibility. It's about understanding that the deepest form of strength is found not in resistance, but in alignment. When you resist the current, you exhaust yourself. When you align with it, you move with grace even through chaos. That's why pretending everything will always work out is not a denial of reality, it's a shift in posture. It's you saying, I'm no longer playing defense against the universe. I'm leaning in. I'm listening. I'm moving with what's real. And that's where power lives, not in prediction, but in presence. Take a moment and reflect. When was the last time you let go of the need to know how it will all unfold? Not just said it, but really felt it deep in your bones, that release, that exhale, that moment of inner silence when you stop trying to force life into your blueprint. That's the moment surrender begins. And here's what's wild, that's also the moment you become more effective, not less. Because when you're not tangled up in anxious forecasting, you can respond, not just react. You can act from clarity, not compulsion. You stop chasing outcomes and start engaging with what's actually happening. Watts often used the metaphor of surfing. When you surf, you're not controlling the wave. You're dancing with it. You can't predict every swell or every shift in the water, but you can feel it. You can learn its rhythm. You can trust your body and your balance, not because the ocean is safe, but because you've remembered your place in it. That's the essence of surrender. It's not about knowing what comes next. It's about showing up in such deep presence that you can meet whatever comes with awareness, grace, and even joy. Can you feel the difference? Now let's go even deeper. What stops us from surrendering? Fear, but not just fear of failure or pain or loss. The real fear is the fear of being out of control, of not being the one who decides, of not knowing what's next. And that fear is rooted in the illusion that we ever had control to begin with. Watts would laugh gently here and say, "You're not the puppet master. You're part of the play." And once you see that, your fear begins to crack, not because life becomes easier, but because your grip softens. Because you realize that the need to control is what's been making you suffer. Ask yourself this: what would it feel like to live one full day as if the universe is on your side? Not in a delusional way, in a curious way, as an experiment. What if you walked through your day with the assumption that nothing is out of place? That even the challenges are part of your unfolding? That even the delays are sacred? That even the detours are exactly what you need? Try it. Watch what happens. You'll notice a strange spaciousness, a quiet confidence, a sense of rhythm returning to your life. You'll stop fighting moments and start inhabiting them. You'll stop rushing through your experiences and start listening to them. And in that shift, you'll discover something most people never touch: the real power that lives in surrender. Watts also reminds us that the self we're trying to protect, the one that clings to plans and guarantees, isn't even real in the way we think it is. It's a construct, a story, a bundle of thoughts and memories we call me. And when that story feels threatened, we panic. But when we loosen our grip on that story, when we stop needing to be in charge of every line, we make room for something bigger to emerge. Something wiser, something more creative. That's when intuition shows up. That's when synchronicity wakes up. That's when you start to feel like you're not alone in this. Because you're not. You never were. This is the heart of Watts' philosophy, that you are not separate from life. You are life. You are not a stranger in this universe. You are the universe aware of itself, just for a little while, in a particular form. And when you live from that place, not just think it, but feel it, you stop needing to control everything. You start trusting the intelligence that birthed you. Not blind faith, deep resonance. And that resonance becomes your compass. It won't always make sense to your mind, but it will feel true. And when you follow that inner yes, you'll find that life doesn't always give you what you wanted, but it will give you exactly what you needed to become who you truly are. So let me ask you now, in this moment, what are you still holding on to that's keeping you from trusting life fully? Is it a story about how things should go? A fear of what might happen if you let go? A belief that you have to carry it all alone? Whatever it is, breathe. Acknowledge it. And then ask, what would it feel like to live without this weight? Not forever, just for one day, just for one moment. That's where it starts. Not with a grand decision, but with a small shift. A willingness to see things differently. A willingness to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything is working out, not in spite of the chaos, but through it. Because here's the ultimate paradox: the more you surrender, the more life meets you. The more you let go, the more doors open. The more you stop clinging, the more you start receiving. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally remembered who you are. Not the controller, not the fixer, not the worrier, but the witness, the dancer, the wave. The end of worry, how radical trust frees you to be fully alive. Imagine waking up tomorrow with absolutely no anxiety about the future. Not because your bank account is full, not because your relationships are perfect, not because every detail is under control, but because you've made the radical choice to trust life completely. What would that feel like? What would you do differently? How would your body move? How would your voice sound? How many decisions have you delayed? How many dreams have you buried? How many moments have you missed because of worry? Alan Watts would say that worry is the echo of a mind that believes it's separate from life. It's what happens when you forget that you are not a fragment in the universe, you are the universe unfolding, moment by moment, in human form. Worry is addictive. It gives the illusion of control. We think that if we run through every scenario, if we rehearse every possible failure or betrayal or loss, we can somehow prevent it. But the truth is, worry doesn't protect you. It drains you. It robs you of clarity, of joy, of presence. It creates a fog around your decisions, a tightness in your chest, a subtle sense that something is always wrong, even when things are fine. And here's the deeper danger. When you live in a state of chronic worry, you begin to filter reality through fear. You don't just imagine bad things, you expect them. You prepare for them, and by doing so, you start to invite them. Watts would say that to worry is to live in time that doesn't exist. The past is gone. The future isn't real yet. You only have now. And worry pulls you out of the now and into a story that hasn't happened, but is treated as if it's true. So what do? We replace worry with radical trust. Not passive trust, not naive optimism, but the deep, grounded trust that says, I don't know how this will unfold, but I know I can meet it. I know I'm not separate from the process. I know life is not against me. That kind of trust doesn't make you careless, it makes you powerful. Because it frees up the energy you were wasting on fear and redirects it toward creation. Let me tell you something few people will say out loud: you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be 5 steps ahead. You don't need to constantly rehearse for disaster. In fact, the more you try to control everything, the more you block the very flow that wants to support you. Watts believed that life is a self-organizing process. Like a tree growing fruit, or a river finding its way to the ocean, there is an intelligence baked into existence itself. And you are part of that intelligence. So why do we act like we're alone in the chaos, like the burden of survival rests solely on our shoulders? The answer is fear. But fear is not a flaw. Fear is a signal. It tells you where you're still clinging, where you still believe that you are separate, where you've forgotten your true nature. And when you meet that fear, not with aggression, but with curiosity, it begins to dissolve. You start to see it for what it is, a protective mechanism built on outdated assumptions. Assumptions like, I have to do everything myself. Or if I relax, everything will fall apart. Or I'll only be safe if I calculate every step in advance. But what if those assumptions are wrong? Worse, what if they're the very thing keeping you from living? Alan Watts invites us to try something revolutionary. Stop trying to fix life. Let it move. Let it breathe. Let it surprise you. Let it teach you. Trust is not about knowing. It's about listening. It's about showing up without armor and saying, I'm here. I'm ready. I don't need guarantees, I need truth. And when you live that way, something astonishing happens. Worry becomes irrelevant. Not because nothing ever goes wrong, but because your relationship to life has changed. You're no longer asking it to be safe. You're asking it to be real. And in the realness, you find stability, not in the external world, but in yourself. Let me ask you something simple but profound. What are you postponing because you're waiting for certainty? Is it a conversation? A project? A change? A truth you haven't spoken out loud? And how much longer are you willing to wait days, months, years just to avoid discomfort? Because here's the thing, certainty is a myth. It's a story we tell ourselves to feel safe. But life doesn't work on scripts. It works on flow. And if you're constantly waiting for the right time, the right feeling, the perfect green light, you'll wait forever. The only thing real is now. And if you can trust now, you don't need to worry about what comes next. This is where the power of pretending that everything will always work out becomes transformative. Because it forces you to act. It removes the excuse of fear. It says, what if you moved forward as if life had your back? Not because you're guaranteed success, but because you're guaranteed growth. And growth is the only real success anyway. So when you stop worrying and start trusting, you don't just change how you feel, you change how you live. You start saying yes more often. You start speaking more honestly. You stop shrinking to fit someone else's comfort zone. You begin to expand into the life that's been waiting for you all along. Watts would remind us that the universe is not a machine, it's a dance. It's not here to be conquered. It's here to be met, moment by moment, with presence and play. So stop tightening. Stop bracing. Stop preparing to be hurt. You've survived so much already. You've endured storms you thought would break you. You've rebuilt yourself from pieces. You're stronger than you think. But more importantly, you're freer than you think. And freedom begins when worry ends. So if you take nothing else from this entire journey, take this, pretend everything will always work out, not because it will, but because it frees you to live like it could. And when you live that way, you become dangerous in the best way. Because now you're not waiting. You're not hiding. You're not asking for permission. You're trusting. You're showing up. You're creating. You're loving. You're risking. You're alive. And what could be more powerful than that?